if I had to give this month a star rating, well, I think I'd have to give it 4 stars. I want to start this video by giving a huge thank you to my top tier Wizard Master patrons. Thank you, Nico, Aaron, Sharon, Scott, Mike, Chris, Leslie, Doug, Weistich, Twaney, Spyro, Sarah, and Chris, the real bookaholic. Thank you all so much. Hey everyone, welcome back to Andrew's Wizardly Reads, and as always guys, I am Andrew, and today guys, we are wrapping up November of 2023. But before we get into this, please like this video and subscribe to the channel, as it does help the channel grow. And check the description box down below for links to all of my social media, including my Amazon wishlist, my Discord, my Patreon, all of that good stuff. In fact, Patreon's done this new thing where, you can do, a trial run free for, 7 days. I've enabled all that on all of my tiers on Patreon if you want to check it out for yourself for a 7-day free trial of all my tiers. That's just kind of a new feature that Patreon's doing. Figured why not? That out of the way, let's talk about the books, because I went hog wild. I had a plan. The plan was abandoned quite early, in fact. I had some NFNs, I had some DNFs. I don't really keep track of those all that well, because as soon as I lose interest in a book, or I remove it from the TBR for that specific month, it just out of my brain. You'll have to forgive me, I'm recording while slap happy. I've worked for 12 hours today. So let's do the digital stuff. Mark of the Fool 4. And I want to talk about Mark of the Fool 4 because it's an interesting entry in the Mark of the Fool series. And I kind of had 3 or 4 false starts on this book, where I would start reading it, and then I would put it down and read something else, and then I would come back to it and then do the same thing, until finally I just cranked through it. And it was good for the most part. I really, really enjoyed it. But the third book was kind of tournament style, so this is a progression fantasy, and we kind of stop the progression in book 3. And it felt like we played a lot of catch up in book number 4. A lot of catch up. Almost too much progression, in my opinion, was had in this entry. The humor was some of the best in the series, though, so I can kind of forgive it a lot of its shortcomings. But overall, I think 3.5 out of 5 stars. It left me wanting something a little bit more, or maybe just to slow down a little bit. It felt like we tried to just pack too much into this entry. Then I came back to an NFN, and that NFN was John Palladino's Buzzard's Bowl. And I think the modus operandi going forward on Tragedy of Sedaine is that I need to read it in 2 chunks, because I did it with Trials of Ashmount. I bailed at 18%, came back, loved it, 4.5 stars. Bailed at 40%, came back, really enjoyed it, 4 stars. Now, one of the things I want to kind of highlight about John Palladino's writing is I think John writes my favorite combat. And what I mean by my favorite combat is if it's just a chaotic group of people and multi-POV stuff where a bunch of stuff is happening, a bunch of people are dying, there's just combat everywhere. John does this thing where he'll put 10 POVs in a chapter and give each of them 3 paragraphs. And then he'll just flip from one to the other. And it gives you these snapshots and these important moments in a battle and in a character's life. It could be their death. It could be them killing an enemy or something like that. But the way that this just kind of jumps, it keeps me interested in everything that's going on. Because for some reason during battle, I just kind of zone out sometimes. And he doesn't give me the chance to do that. He's like, hey, here's something really intense and really cool. Boom, moving on. Boom, moving on. And he might come back to one he's already done, but he only gives him 3 POV, or three paragraphs, not POVs. 3 paragraphs, and then he moves on. So, the combat in here, he does it at least twice within the chapter, or within the book. And I absolutely loved it. So, yes, really enjoyed this. I'm very glad to have read it, and we're going to put it right there. Next up, we're going to talk about Winter Solstice, which is Wandering in book number 4. And this one is interesting. Now, I do have my spoiler review for this one kind of coming out here soon. I've got it recorded already. It hasn't been edited, though, I don't think, at the time of recording this. But essentially, this one's messy. And not messy in kind of a good way and in a bad way. So I'm going to, again, clarify, 4-star read here. But, like, all the individual parts of this book were really, really good. But when you bring them together for a air quotes book, it's kind of haphazard, chaotic, and all over the place. And I think that's because, from what I understand, is like there's kind of a subset of this book called Wistrom Days, which is kind of like a prequel, built-in novella. Well, I can't say novella, built-in novel. That's just kind of smack dab in the middle of it. And parts of this were initially earlier on in the story. Again, Wandering In is a web novel, and it was kind of brought together and compiled and compressed to kind of make it a cohesive just story to kind of just get it down in one shot. Wistrom Days is really, really enjoyable, but like and again, I use the term, it's a novel. Wistrom Days is a novel in a novel. So that was kind of interesting. And it's a little bit jarring because it just kind of drops you right in. And then, like, you figure out that, like, a character has asked another character about it. And that's why we get this thing. So, it's like, all the individual parts, very, very good. Just kind of a little bit messy in terms of, like, a cohesive, smooth-flowing story. But I'm very excited for the 5th book. Then, one that wasn't even on my radar. We got to, like, the last couple days of the month. And all of a sudden, like, I was ahead on my reading, and I was like, I don't know what I'm going to want to read. I don't have a lot of super short books that I can knock out in like a day and a half. And then all of a sudden, I was like, but I do. And it's been about a month and a half, 2 months since I read my last Stephen King novel. And I was like, you know what? Let's do it. Let's go all the way back to the beginning and read Carrie. And I gotta say, I loved Carrie. I really, really enjoyed this. I did the audio through my library. And then there were a couple moments where, like, I was just kind of hybrid reading. Or immersion reading. I guess that's what it's called, is immersion reading. And 4.5 stars. It may not be a top 10. Or it may be, like, at, like, the number 10 spot on my top 10. But going back and reading the very first Stephen King novel was just a fantastic experience, and kind of seeing where he started, where a lot of his ideas originated from. It was just really good. I thoroughly enjoyed this story. Now, I knew the inciting incident because at this point it's been like 50 years? Yeah, like 50 years, and it's basically entered the cultural zeitgeist. So I knew about the inciting incident, but I never actually read it. And so it's good to now know a little bit more about it. Next up, I did Death of a Christmas Tree Salesman. And I did a book review for this one on December 1st. You can check it out right there. This is a murder mystery at the North Pole that is being investigated and solved by a snowman who becomes sentient 12 days out of the year during the Christmas season. It's great. It's festive. It's more festive than it is a murder mystery, but there is a murder mystery to be solved with all of this Christmas lore. And I thought it was masterful how Patricia Meredith, the author, just squeezed all of this festive cheer into a murder mystery novel. I absolutely loved it. Definitely go check this one out. Another one that was not on my radar, but I was doing a buddy read with Tori from Tori Talks and Murphy Napier and Nico from Nico's Book Reviews. And all of a sudden, we were like, hey, does anybody want to... Murphy goes, does anybody want to buddy read this with me? And I was like, I happen to have the first book right here. And I had actually just requested it from my library, the audiobook, because it was narrated by Simon Vance. And, literally the day before, I was like, you know what? I should check this out. Because, again, I was ahead on my reading, and I was looking for short books, and I realized that this book was relatively short. And that is His Majesty's Dragon by Naomi Novik. I struggle with Naomi Novik's. I struggle with, there's a term for it when, it's NN or BB or where two words have the same first letter. I forget what it's called right now. My sleep-deprived brain cannot think of it. But that out of the way, I loved this. This is a solid 4.75 out of 5. And the only reason I'm knocking it like a quarter is because like the third part has a lot more combat, and it's very different from the first 2 parts, which the first 2 parts I absolutely fell in love with. Temeraire and Lawrence have an amazing dynamic. Temeraire might be one of my new favorite animal companions. I'm committing to at least the first 3 books. Well, it's either the first 3 or the first 5 that are basically held by the fandom of this series to be the best. So I will commit to those. I'm going to pick up the physical copies here soon. I've already got them on my Amazon wish list. I'm excited to read them. And yeah, guys, this was fantastic. It's historical fantasy set during the Napoleonic Wars. It's Dragon Rider, but it's a twist on the Dragon Rider of, instead of coming of age, we have got an already established, fully grown adult who has already a successful military career. And dragons aren't rare. Well, I mean, dragons are rare, but they're a part of the military. So there's a dragon corps. So it's not like, dragons have been lost and things like that. No, this was amazing. I'm thoroughly shocked, surprised, and excited and happy to have finally read this. Next, Tongue Eater. This is the 6th Mage Errant book in the series. And I don't know how I feel about it. Because it was good, probably 4 stars, but ultimately kind of forgettable. And what I mean by that is this is just kind of a setup book. This is basically this is the cold days of the Mage Errant series. If you're a Dresden fan, you kind of know cold days is where Dresden's kind of getting back on his feet after changes. And that's kind of what we're doing here, is getting back on our feet after the previous book in Mage Errant, which the name escapes me. Siege of Skyhold. There we go. Siege of Skyhold, which was a fantastic and explosive book, and it shook the whole series up. And that's kind of what Tongue Eater's doing, is it's just kind of trying to settle everything down, get all the people in the right kind of position for the ultimate finale, which is the last echo of the Lord of Bells, which I'm reading in December. Then I read Dan Jones' Essex Dogs. And this was initially put on my radar by the Brothers Gwyn. And so that's the reason I own this. And then one of my patrons, Wystitch, got to select a book for me to read this month. And this is what he selected. Now, Wystitch has selected books for me before, and I usually have DNF'd them. So I'm so sorry, Wystitch. But this time I did not DNF. No, this time I finished the book. And essentially, Essex Dog, which this is the Broken Binding edition, by the way, with the beautiful sprayed edge. The only thing I don't like about this is there's kind of like something, or some like section dividers that have a thing. And you can't, I don't know if my camera will pick it up, but you can see these kind of dashed lines through the digitally printed edge. I don't particularly love that. But other than that, this book is basically set during the 100 Years' War. We have got a 10-man mercenary group who has joined the English to invade France. And we kind of follow them from skirmish to skirmish to skirmish. The French are fleeing, the English are giving chase and killing and pillaging villages, and it's just a lot of good fun. Well, I don't want to say it's a lot of good fun because it's a particularly brutal book. But at the same time, I really enjoyed reading this particular historical fantasy. Fiction. It's not fantasy. Fiction. All right, next up, we have got a big one. And a while ago, I did a video where I asked you guys for help and to vote, and you all wanted me to read this book. And I kind of let it fall to the wayside. And then a couple of my friends kind of brought it back to the forefront, and that would be Murphy Napier and Tori from Tori Talks. And they wanted me to read The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. And I'm very glad that I read this, because this is, again, another 4-star read. And one of my main critiques about this is it's awesome. It pulls you through the story fast. The world building is on point. I would probably slot this as my favorite not my favorite. I would probably slot this one after, I would say, Valor in terms of my favorite John Gwynne books, which Valor is probably was my third. So I would say this is my third favorite John Gwynne book at this time. And the reason I say that is the world building, the action, all of that is on point. Like, it is on point. but I didn't really vibe with any of the characters. I didn't really care all that much. I wasn't able to sympathize with Orca. Varg, maybe. By the end, I'm like vibing with Varg a little bit. So it was good. It was great. But in the end, like, it was just, I had trouble kind of finding a character to root for. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm rooting for what Orca's doing. But if Orca were to die in pursuit of her vengeance, I don't know if I would be all that upset. I don't know if I'm explaining myself super well here. Basically, I didn't really identify with the characters. I was enjoying what they were doing, but not necessarily vibing with it. So, we got Hunger of the Gods next year. Hopefully that gets rectified. Then another one I did a book review for, we've got The Blood of Crows by Alex C. Pierce. And Ren is a scamp. Well, I think Ren is a scamp, but he's actually in his 20s, late teens, early 20s. And he's a thief, and he's a con artist, and he's trying to clear his name because he's been accused of murder. And yeah, this one's really, really good. You want to check this one out. It's got a very subtle romance. It's got some steampunk elements. It's kind of in a city that is like a walled, tiered city. We've got monarchs. We've got inquisitors. We've got a lot of stuff in here. We've got ancient gods. We've got some really, really, really cool stuff built into a relatively short book that doesn't feel breakneckingly super breakneck. You know what I'm trying to say. The pacing isn't terrible, or it's not sluggish. It's not sluggish. It's not sluggish and slow. It's not super fast. It was like just right. Really enjoyed this one. Then, again, I've still got 4 books to talk about, guys. Like, it was a very, very productive month. Next up, we've got We Are the Dead, another Broken Binding edition. We Are the Dead by Mike Shackle. This is the Lost War. And I knew that this was dark, but it balances grimdark in a way that surprised me and kept it incredibly readable. It went super dark. We'd have swaths of people dying, and basically, like, this great, powerful people lose this war to individuals they thought were barbarians. And then they have to kind of learn how to live under occupation. They're having this new religion forced upon them. And they're trying to fight back and survive. And it's brutal, but there's always just enough hope to constantly pull you through the story. We've got an individual fighting to find their courage. We've got somebody just fighting for her baby. It's incredibly compelling read. I highly recommend. If you've been kind of waiting on We Are the Dead by Mike Shackle, give this one a try if you like grimdark fantasy, because it's really good. And then I was halfway through Winter Warriors by David Gemmell when I last spoke to you guys in October for that wrap-up. Well, of course, I finished out Winter Warriors. And this is one I'd like to go back and reread. Mainly because it gets 4 stars. But when I was reading it physically, it was 5 stars. But I like the narrator, Sean Barrett, a lot. Like, I think he's a 5-star narrator. But for some reason, when I was listening to the audio, it was more of like a 3-star read. But when I was reading it physically, it was a 5-star read. So I don't quite know what my disconnect was there. But again, we follow that David Gemmell formula. We've got a brand new cast of characters. We've got some aging out warriors who people think are past their prime, and boy are they wrong. Don't mess with an old dog, because they already know the tricks and they know how to fight dirty effectively. I loved Winter Warriors, and this is definitely one I would love to have a special edition of Draenei, so I could just, like the James Bond folios. I did a video on it, but man, if I could get those, that would be amazing. 2 more books to talk about. I did 1,000 Li, The Second Expedition by Tao Wong. This is book number 4. And essentially, Wu Ying finds out that his master has been kind of poisoned. And it's a poison that has a very rare cure. So he goes on an expedition to kind of try and find the components. Now, this one was interesting because I thought the pacing was going to fall flat on its face. I was for sure thinking there's no way we're going to be able to wrap this up without having feeling rushed. Because we kind of stop in this city for like a good 40% of the book. And then we like go get the other ingredients really quickly. And I was just like, there's no way that this pacing is going to feel good. And Tao Wang manages to make the pacing feel relatively good. The end, though, just kind of snap and blink and you'll miss it type of deal, where he just kind of, it just kind of happens. And so I've already started reading the 5th book. So I give this one, again, 4 stars. It's 4-star rating month. And yeah, I'm very excited to see where the story goes, because Wu Ying is he's funnier than I think he should be. And I don't know if that has to do with Travis Baldry's narration, because I hybrid read these, or I said it again, didn't I? I immersion read these at times with Travis Baldry and the physical book. But man, I love this cultivation fantasy. It is something special in my opinion. And then the last book I have to talk about with you is one that I'm about 30% into currently. And literally I just started it because I accepted an arc of it. And that's Michael R. School Thesis' Arc of Ascension. You can check out this cover right here. Gorgeous cover. It's a space opera. I almost wanted to say soap opera, and I know that was incredibly wrong. So it is a space opera, and it feels very space opera, and it's got a lot of action. It's only about 200 pages, and so far, as of 30%, I'm having a great time with it. So I will let you know more in December's wrap-up when I'm done with it. But that's all I've really got for you today, guys. Let me know in the comments, how did your November reading month go? And as always, like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, peace out. Stay magical. Bye. And as always, I want to give a huge thank you to my patrons. Thank you for supporting my passion.